The Seven Secrets of Somewhere Lake, Chapter 10, Heart to Heart. Hi, Bub and Tony, filled with desire to do everything just right, showered us with questions. What will we feed Zipper? Where does Zowie sleep? Should we give Xenia a bath? What, where, why, when came at us constantly, and every question had to be answered. There must be fox biscuits for Zowie, milk and pablum for Zipper, dog food for Zany, and anything and everything for Xenia. There must be wild bird feed at the different feeders, cracked corn for our squirrels and chipmunks, whole wheat bread for Salt and Pepper, and when they came, for Salt and Pepper when they came, and something put out each night for the raccoons. It wasn't enough to supply the animals with food. The boys must be present much of the time when they were eating, for the main responsibility our lads carried out was to keep the animals accustomed to the presence of human beings. They must guard against hawks, owls, eagles, and other predators which might attack our island creatures. It is no soft job you have taken on, boys, I assured them. You will be busy day and night. Who cares, sputtered Tony. If we have to be up day and night, we will just see so much more of all this. Eh, Hubbub? Hubbub smiled and nodded his approval. But we haven't been here 24 hours, he said, and we haven't seen those beavers yet. I have been saving that, I answered. Tomorrow morning at dawn we will go to Somewhere Lake. There you will learn about the most exciting part of your work. Dawn is a magic hour in the forest. Small wonder that primitive people as well as poets have pictured the woods filled with little folk that flee at the coming of daylight. Mystery haunts the shadows. There is a song in the tiny dewdrops that cling to the ends of pine needles, a hush in the aisle as though the whole forest were listening. The distances, obscure in misty shadows, seemed infinite. The beauty of dawn was at its height the morning we went to Somewhere Lake. The two boys, Jenny and I all went, and of course Zany. We saw 3 deer that morning, lovely, graceful creatures that looked more beautiful than ever in the pale light. So that is Somewhere Lake, Tony said softly, as we emerged from the forest and looked out at the small body of water. Now bring on your secrets. I see one, I whispered, pointing at the beaver swimming near the far shore. The animal was towing a small branch of aspen. There's another, said Hubbub, permitting himself to get excited. And another, and another, and another, Jenny added, as several beavers' heads appeared. Woof, went Zany, his best whisper bark. Likely the whole 7 were there, though we did not see them all at once. They kept diving and coming to the surface, so it was impossible to count them accurately. While we stood watching them, I cautioned the boys to guard well the secret. Isn't this on your land? Asked Tony, as I revealed to the boys the danger that these animals might be trapped. No, we are beyond our lines. And beyond the refuge, too? Yes. This territory is restricted only by seasonal hunting and trapping laws. The boys looked seriously concerned. How would trappers get them? Asked Tony. They would do it in the wintertime with steel traps, I replied. Have you boys ever seen a steel trap, or an animal caught in one? They had not. While they looked out at the beavers swimming about in a happy freedom, I told them something of the barbaric cruelty of steel trapping. It was not my desire to dwell on gruesome things, and I disliked to torture the thoughts of these 2 fine lads who would never be cruel to anything or anyone. But the world will never correct such evils by being ignorant of their existence or indifference to them. I told them of the fierce and merciless steel jaws that were hidden about the forest. When an animal touches the trigger, I explained, the trap snaps shut, usually catching the creature by 1 or 2 legs. The steel teeth sink right into the flesh or even into the bone. I would wince. Does it kill the animal? He questioned. No. As a rule, the trapped creature is held there. Perhaps for days. Sometimes he breaks off his leg by continually struggle. Sometimes he chews it off himself. Could there be a law that would stop such cruel trapping? Asked Hubbub, shocked at what he had heard. No, Hubbub, I replied. At least not yet. Laws are only good if they can be enforced, and if they are voluntarily obeyed. It would take an army to enforce such a law, and few trappers have sufficient humane feelings that they would want to obey it. Our only hope lies in finding some substitute way of trapping that will end this torture. Every year, hundreds of thousands of traps are used in our country, and millions of animals suffer indiscriminately. Suffer indescribably. We want to save our 7 beaver friends if we can. How can people do things like that, Hybub said. No man could do it if he knew animals as you and I do, I replied. Tony and Hybub vowed that no one would ever learn of the 7 secrets from them. Our conversation turned to the scenes of life before us. On the far shore we could see dimly one of the secrets feeding on the leaves of a fallen aspen. Another returned from some mission back into the woods and silently slipped into the water. Jenny put some apples in an accustomed place. It seemed that her act must surely be unobserved. It seemed that her act must surely be unobserved, but within a few minutes 2 beavers emerged and began eating the delicacy. Your work is to develop the confidence of the beavers, I said to the boys. We don't want them to be pets, but we do want them to accept us and to let us watch them at a distance at their work. If we can get them safely through the next spring and make them accept us as companions, we will look upon marvelous work at this lake. Already there was a difference in the water of the lake. It was clearing, the brown color leaves leaving it. Jenny was astonished at the change. When we brought them here, the lake was brown as root beer, she exclaimed. But just how could they affect the water? Asked Tony. They can't filter it. They are opening up the natural springs, I explained. This is a spring-fed lake, but the springs have been covered over and plugged by the decaying vegetable matter washed in from the forest floor, the leaves dropped by trees, the weeds growing on the lake bottom. The flow of clear water has been hampered, and the brown of decaying vegetable matter has colored the water. Now they have discovered those springs. They dive down and pull away the debris and encourage the pure water to flow. I glanced quickly at Hybub. Sometimes such things happen in our minds, I went on, looking away. We permit wrong thinking to clog up our lives. When this happens, we have to work like beavers to clear away the things that darken thoughts and let the fountains of pure inspiration flow freely once more. I dared not look at Hybub now, but I felt him looking at me. The last day before we departed for the West found our boys well prepared for the work before them. There was a car at their disposal so they could obtain supplies and mail from town, and each was licensed to drive it. They were comfortably settled in the cabin. They were to keep records of their experiences with animals and to send us regular reports about them. Already they had formed close friendships with Zipper, Zowie, Zany, and Xenia. I like 'em all, said Tony, but Zany is my favorite. I'll take Zowie, chimed in Hybub. That leaves Zipper for me, said Jenny, and Xenia is mine, I declared. Any of you want to start something? During the last evening we sat about a campfire. It was one of those times when the world is particularly harmonious. The fire sent shadows dancing up the stately trunks of red pines, and stars appeared as low as they looked to be entwined in the massed foliage overhead. The crackling of the fire echoed back and forth on the silent shores. The waters of the lake were like polished marble. In the west, the silver of the new moon crept slowly down to the horizon, closely followed by a brilliant Mars. Tony had been quoting bits of poetry suitable to the occasion, some of it his own. Zany came into the circle, gave each of us a lick, and then curled up near the fire. Only Hybub walked nervously about, now stopping to pet Zany, now standing with his back to the fire, looking out over the marble-surfaced lake. I watched him for a few moments and then surprised myself by saying, Hybub, old top, suppose you and I go canoeing. I have a hunch that up 4 Mile Creek there might be a bear, a deer, a sea serpent, or something equally adventurous. Of course, if you two want to give up your poetry, And come along, you are welcome, I added, looking at Jenny and Tony. No, thanks, said Jenny. We'll keep the home fires burning. Hi, Bub and I shoved off in the canoe. As we paddled across the lake, I looked back time and again at the red bubble of light the fire made in the midst of this immense blackness. I never ceased to marvel at that sight of a campfire at night. It charms me now, even as it did along the rivers of Indiana and Illinois when I was a boy. Repetition only increases its charm and meaning. The scene speaks in language more forceful than words of primitive sincerity, of wild beauty and natural freedom, of pure, simple friendship and love. Hubbub looked back too, and while I couldn't see his face in the dark, I felt he was deeply affected. As the far shore of the lake, we heard a deer walking along slowly in the shallow waters. Let's get close to him, I whispered. Do you remember how to do it, lad? Hubbub answered by action. He began schooling his paddle, submerged in a way I had taught him years ago. Our canoe moved in perfect silence as I directed it to the place from which the sound came. Presently we were close enough to make out a graceful, shadowy form on the shoreline. It was a young doe, looking like some ethereal creature in the dim light of stars and moon. Back in the woods we could hear the breaking of twigs, doubtless from the companion deer. Our deer had not noticed us yet. She was too concerned with nibbling lily pads that were floating on the shallow water and leaves from overhanging trees. Hubbub remembered the trick well. He was every inch a natural woodsman. While the deer reached for a bite, he stroked silently with his paddle, but as the creature looked up, he held whatever position he was in. Closer and closer we drifted. Had the creature on the lake shore been alone, I believe we could have come close enough to touch her with the paddle. But the one back in the utter darkness of the shoreline forest gave a shrill, whistling snort, the alarm note of the deer. The head, ears, and white tail of the one before us shot up all at once, and the startled creature left the water with a magnificent leap that landed her deep in the shadows. Hubbub let out a gasp of joy. Wonderful, isn't it, lad? I asked him. An amazing thing about nature adventures is that they never wear out. They never grow old. Hubbub turned silently in the canoe. What was that you asked? He said. The last part, what was it? Nature adventures never grow old, never wear out, I repeated, and then I added, I think that's because they are fundamental and real. We paddled on in silence for several minutes. Nighthawks circled overhead, uttering their monotone cries. Bullfrogs spoke out from the darkness. We were approaching the mouth of 4 Mile Creek, and could see the silhouettes of spruce trees reaching up into the sky. Hi, Bub, I said softly. Yes? The waters of your lake are muddy, old top. They aren't clear and sparkling the way they used to be. Your parents are worried about you, and Jenny and I are concerned. You know that, don't you? He finally got a little, yes, out. Sure you do. Some way you have let a lot of refuse wash in it, and it has covered over the springs. Don't you think it is about time to clean them out? Hubbub paddled hard for a few strokes. At last he found his voice sufficiently to say, It would be a pretty hard job, I'm afraid. What of it? I asked, laughing to ease the tension. Don't you suppose the 7 Secrets had a tough time on the bottom of that lake? They found sticks, logs, and muck in their way, but they twisted and tugged and pulled things around with all their strength, and you see the results are showing up already. A discouraging silence followed. I made one more try. Of course I realize it is really none of my business. And that did it. Oh, but it is your business, Hubbub broke in. I want it to be your business. I laughed. Well then, you are my business. Talk things out with me, if it will help. Well... He laid down his paddle and looked ahead. I sculled the canoe along, waiting for him to collect his thoughts. Well, he began again. I guess it is all just one thing. War. War, I exclaimed. You may forget, he was saying, now talking freely, that I am a junior in high school. Less than 2 years and I shall graduate, and they give me a diploma in one hand and a gun in the other. I had expected his trouble to be school problems, perhaps a youthful romance that was not going so well, but not war. That is what the fellows keep saying, a diploma in one hand and a gun in the other. Then I am supposed to go out and fight with and kill someone called an enemy, a boy that is right now like myself. He doesn't hate me, and I don't hate him, but we will have to kill each other. I don't want to fight, and I don't want to hurt anything. You taught me that, Sam Campbell. There was almost an accusation in his voice. I paddled on, thinking hard. It was clear to me now, very clear. Hybub was building a wall about himself, a psychological defense. He was hardening himself to keep from being hurt too deeply. I just don't understand it, he was saying. Our enemies in the last war are our friends now. They are the same people, though. We don't hate them anymore, and I guess they don't hate us. Now, someone else has to be taught that he is an enemy, and we have to learn to hate him. What does it? It almost seems like the entertainment we had at school. A man showed us something about Hinduism. Some boys and girls went up on the stage, just boys and girls like all the rest. But the man first made them laugh like idiots, and then he made them cry, and then he made them dig ditches right on the stage. Pretty soon he brought them out of it, and they were just the same boys and girls they had been. Isn't it just like that with war? Doesn't something sort of hypnotize people to make one nation hate another and make them fight? Then, when it is over, we see how foolish it was, until something hypnotizes us again. We were following the winding course of 4 Mile Creek now. A muskrat swam ahead of us, leaving a V-shaped wake. A great barred owl was calling from the top of a white pine stub. I cannot justify war, Hybub, I finally managed to say. I only know that at times it is the lesser of two evils, the loss of freedom being the greater. Some day the world will see the error of it as clearly as you have. See that all aggression, hatred, fighting is a kind of hypnotism, as you say. Then the world will resist these things. That is what I mean, Hybub broke in. Why don't we fight the thing that causes the trouble, and not one another? Why don't we fight hatred and fear, selfishness, greed, all the things that destroy human happiness? I carried on his thought. You are right, old top. That is the real conflict. Those are the enemies that hypnotize us when we are not on guard and make us do foolish things that are not natural to us at all. They make great nations do crazy things too. Yeah, Hybub even laughed a little. Huh, they go nuts, like those kids on the stage. And when a nation does that sort of thing, the rest of the world has to hold it back so it doesn't destroy all human happiness and freedom. I held to the opening in his thought. But Hybub, that is only battling the results of wrong thinking. It is the thinking that needs to be handled, right in you and in me. Love, faith, kindness, those are the weapons we must use. We were well up 4 Mile Creek now, the black waters of which looked like a velvet ribbon entwined in the forest. The stream narrowed down so that both banks were nearly within paddle's length of the canoe. The course twisted and turned, making us give more attention to our paddling. We were approaching the limit of navigation, a place where a huge tree had fallen across the stream. Here the waters muttered and sang as they found their way through branches and under the large log. Listen, Hybub, I said in a half-whisper. Hybub was silent for a brief moment, then picked up his thought. The fellows keep telling me nature is bunk. They laugh when I talk of being kind. They keep saying what fun it is to hunt. If men hunt one another, why shouldn't they hunt animals? They try to get tough as they can, and they laugh at me. Hybub, I said strongly. I do hear voices. Voices, you know. Listen. Now the lad gave his attention to the woods. A big bullfrog gave his raucous call not 6 feet from the canoe. Nighthawks were circling overhead. Deep in the gloom, a white-throated sparrow gave one clear, high-pitched song. The murmuring of waters joined the voices of insects to complete one grand choral effect. Hear it, lad? I followed. Forget about the city and forget what the fellows tell you. Just listen. More and more dominating became the calls of nature. The voices of the water reached the proportions of a chorus. They were singing, laughter, merriment, as by a group of happy campers. You know that call, Hybub, I whispered. You and I heard it together in this very creek before. We heard it on Sanctuary Lake in Canada. We heard it in our camps when the wind was playing on the pines and waves were breaking on the shores. Do you know what I mean? Yes, responded Hybub. I hear it. The voices of the woods. Why, I had forgotten about that. Why didn't I hear it at first? Just listen now, I replied. Maybe we can answer that question later. We sat long, giving our undivided attention to the phenomenon of forest sounds which woodsmen have called the voices of the woods. It is mysterious, but not a mystery. It is composed of the simple voices of nature, those things that are just beyond direct attention. Indians have listened to it through the ages and thought it the vocalizing of spiritual beings. Nature lovers have found in it one of the most charming aspects of the woodland. Not always can we hear it. One must be absolutely quiet and receptive, or the delicate and delightful effect is lost to one. It is the crowning grandeur of wild, primitive beauty. You've been sort of hypnotized, Hybub. You were thinking more of what the world had been telling you than you were about nature. And so you have been doing things not natural to you, I said seriously. The good things of the world are like the voices of the woods. They are quiet, calm, once likened to a still small voice. We have to make ourselves listen to them. We have to make ourselves listen for them and to them. It seems that the other kind of things make all the noise, do all the talking. If we don't watch out, that is all we hear. War, meanness, drunkenness, and the like. But if we hold to what we know and don't listen to all the suggestions, we can always hear the real things and be happy in them. We put our canoe about and slowly made our way back to the lake and the island. Tony and Jenny were still reading poetry by the light of the campfire. When at last we returned to our cabins, I walked along with my arm around Hybub's shoulders. His face wore a real smile, much like his old-time one. Sam Campbell, he said, I believe we cleaned out some of my springs tonight, like the beavers do in their pond. The water looks clearer already.